All right, so random is basically just a way of getting random numbers, and that can add variation into our designs. So that's something that's nice that we can do with code very easily. That's harder to do in other contexts. In P5, we have a random function, which is really useful for generating random numbers. It basically takes this math.random, or this math function that is built into JavaScript, but it makes it easier to use. So I'll show you what the math version does, and then we'll look at how to use it in P5. So JavaScript has this thing called math, and it's just this like object in our code that has access to a bunch of basic math things. So for example, we've used pi before, and this is where that comes from. So when we're using pi in P5, it's just referencing the built-in JavaScript math function. There's other stuff in here that we can use, like cosine and tangent and other stuff, but what we're going to look at right now is random, which is right here. In pure JavaScript, or vanilla JavaScript as it's sometimes called, math.random is just a function that generates a random number that's just between 0 and 1. So as is, it's not super useful because there's not a lot of things that we use that are between 0 and 1, but we can convert that number into a range that's more useful. So we can create random colors and sizes and positions and things like that. So every time I run math.random, you can see I get a different number. And it's always between 0 and 1, but you can see there's a lot of variation because it's a floating point number. So these numbers, even though they're all less than 1 and greater than 0, they're very different numbers because they have this long floating point. And so we can convert that into a more useful number. So for example, if I wanted a color, I could say math.random times 255. And so that's going to give me a random number between 0 and 255. Because it just takes whatever that random value is, but it multiplies it by 255. It's going to give me some number in between that range. We don't really have to use it that way because P5 has a random function that does a lot of that for us. So we're going to look at how to use it in P5. So one thing to notice is that I can't use random outside of my P5 functions. So if I say something like this, I'm going to get an error. And it's actually going to say, random is not defined in the current scope, so we have to move it into our setup function. So that's why when we're using random numbers, we're either just going to use them directly in one of our setup or draw functions, or we're going to make a variable in our global variables and then assign it inside setup or draw. For this, for the project we're going to work on right now, I'm actually going to take out the draw function until we have some better ways of using random. It's going to be kind of weird because you'll notice if I do something very, very simple like ellipse, let's say I get a random value. So I'll say variable x equals random, and I'll say 0 to width. And then I draw an ellipse at x. Because of the way the draw function works, you're going to notice that the ellipse is just moving all over the place really, really fast. And that's kind of annoying to look at, and it's not really what we want. So for now, we're just going to use the setup function, so it just draws once. So you'll notice if I take the draw function out completely, now it's just going to go one time. And so we'll get a nice design or drawing, and then we can just run it again. And so that's what I'm going to use for today, until we have some other ways that we can control the randomness. But mostly what we want to do is just use some randomness. So let's get rid of this for a second and talk about random again. So for now, I'm just going to log some random values. So if I say console.log, or let's assign a value. So I'll say variable x. And if I say just variable x equals random, that's basically just using that math.random function that we used before. So if I log this, and if I draw an ellipse at x, or a circle, the circle is always going to look like it's basically in the same place because a random value on its own is going to be between 0 and 1. The thing that's nice about P5 is we can create a range very easily. So if I put in a number here, like 400, now I'll get a random value between 0 and 400. So that's pretty useful just for this particular scenario. We can use it for a lot of different stuff. I can also do a negative number, but if we do a negative number here, we're not going to see the circle, so skip that. But I can also set a minimum and a maximum. So if I set between 200 and 400, now it's still random, but it's always going to be over 200 and less than 400. So this is useful if we want to use some randomness, but control where it is in a particular area. That's going to be useful. We can also, well, actually, no, we haven't learned how to do that yet. We can do random colors with numbers. So let's do another random value. So I'll say variable R for red. And now I'll say between 0 and 255. And then I'll fill R and 0 and 0. We did kind of look at this last time when we added some random colors in our animation. But now you can see, it's kind of hard to see on the projector, but there's a different amount of red each time. We can't go over 255, or you can, but you'll notice if I go over 255, it's always going to be the brightest red because it stops at 255. But again, we can control this range as well. If I always want there to be a little bit of red, but not full red, I could say 200 to 255. Then I'll get less variation. I could say 100 to 255, and I'll get a little bit more variation. That's pretty much all there is to it. There's more stuff that you can do with random, but for today, I think that's all we really need to know. But what it's really useful for is designing stuff when we have a loop where everything is the same, but we might want to create some variations. We can use randomness to do that. So let's do that. I'll do an example, and we'll do a little randomized design. So I'll call this random pattern. And again, I'm just using setup here because if I use draw, it's going to be refreshing all the time and it's just going to look kind of crazy. But we'll figure out how to do that better in a future lesson. So we'll say random pattern. And so I'm just going to start with a loop. And instead of drawing a window, I'm just going to draw like a little self-portrait just to kind of, do an example. So instead of doing X, I'm just going to do I. So I'm not thinking about covering the page. I can just think about where do I want to place stuff. So I'm going to say for variable I equals 0. And I'm going to say I want to have, let's say I want to have 5 parts of my pattern. Okay. So now I can, set an X value. So I could say X. And I could say something like I times 50. And then if I draw, let's start with my face for my self-portrait. I'll draw a circle at X and 250. Okay, so if I say I times 50, I don't like fill up the whole canvas because I'm only moving by 50 pixels, and my canvas is wider than that. So I might want to set a width and base that on the canvas size. This is a nice thing where we can use some math to help us do some basic design without actually having to figure out the numbers ourselves, as long as we kind of understand how things work. So I could say, I can make a variable W for width, and I could just say it's 400, or I could use the width from the canvas, and I could divide that by the number of the elements that I want, so I'll divide that by 5. So now I don't even really care what that number is. If I say I times W, it's going to spread out my my circle across the canvas now. So if I change the size of the canvas, it's going to spread that out. Or if I change the number of items that I want, it'll update that. Or actually, I need to update both. So let's make a variable for that too. So I'm going to make a variable called n for the number of items. And so I do have to keep, I have to count the number as well. So I have to put that when I divide here, but also when I count. So I'll put a note here that says number of items. And so if I want the width of the design, I just take the width of the canvas divided by the number that I want here. And then I count to that number of items using I. And so now I have, an easy way to figure out X is just the index, which number we're at, times the overall width of each item. And if I want to move that over, I can add like something here. So I center it a little bit. You don't have to center it, but you might want to center it. So now we've kind of got our pattern set up. If I want to change the number of items, I just change that 5, and now I've got 5, but they're in the same basic design. So this actually isn't really having anything to do with random, but it's a good way to kind of set up our design. So let's randomize our X, but let's just randomize it a little bit. So I'm going to set no stroke for a second, just to simplify this. Okay, so let's say I want it to be like, in the column, but a little bit random. So it's not always exactly the same. I could just add a little bit of randomness here. So if I add like random 20, now it's, it's hard to see, but each time I refresh, you're going to see they move around a little bit. If you want more randomness, you can increase that number. So now each time I refresh, the circles are still generally spread out across the canvas, but they wiggle a little bit within their basic area. And again, this is another place where I could use a negative number. So I could say random -20 to 20. So now I get a little bit of randomness, with my circles as I refresh them. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Let's change the color and then add some eyes. Although if we change the color, it's going to change all the colors. So let's set this fill. Let's set the fill to blue first, and then we'll add a random color for the eyes. Okay, so to make a random color, I need RG and B. So I'll say variable R. And to start, I'm just going to say 255 for all of them. So I'll just have a completely random color. RGB. And so now I'm going to fill with R and G and B. And I'm just going to draw 2 little eyes on my character. So I'm going to say eyes. And I'll say circle. And I'll use X again, but I'll say X. Well, I'm already actually adding 50 to X here for this offset. So I'll do like, that's kind of confusing. Let's get rid of that. And I'll add it here. So I'll add my offset at the beginning when I first create X. So that line looks kind of crazy, but I'm just taking like where I want to start, which is 50, and then what column I'm in. So that's I times W, and then I'm just adding a little random offset here. Okay. So now we've got our random color, and so we'll put a circle for our eyes at X. I'll do like X minus 20, and our Y is 200, and for the size of the eyes, I'll do like 10. And then I'll paste that, and I'll put one eye on the other side. Okay, so they're a little too far apart. So maybe I'll do like 15. And so now you can see there's a variation. So each set of eyes is a different color because I'm choosing a random color each time I go through the loop. Okay, so if I wanted a random color but it to stay the same, I could just move my random values outside of the loop. So now they get set at the beginning, but they stay the same for each part of the loop. So that's an important aspect of how the loop works, is that we can set some values before we do the loop, and they'll stay the same throughout the loop, like our number of items, the width of each item. We can set some things inside the loop, and so they'll change each time we want to go inside the loop. So it kind of depends if you want, a different color. Maybe we start with this color for the face. So we could add like our face to each one of these. And so that'll be always the same color. Okay, so now we've got a random face color, but maybe I want different colors for the eyes just to kind of make it a little more interesting. So then I'll put these guys back in here, and I'll have R eyes, and G eyes, and B eyes. So you don't have to do it this way. It really just depends on what you're going for, but it's important to know what change is going to have what effect. And so now I've got random color eyes, but the same color face. So, again, this might not be what you want, but if thinking through what's possible versus thinking through what we want. And so maybe we like this, but we don't, let's say I'm not a big fan of the color green. I want less green. So instead of green 255, I can just make a smaller number there. So if I just say green is 200, now there's still a little bit of green. I need a little bit of green to create lighter colors, because if I don't have any green at all, it's always going to be a little dark. But I don't have as much green, so it's less likely to be green. So with randomness, you're really dealing with what's possible, what's the likelihood of different things happening, versus like this is definitely blue or this is definitely red. So if I change this to like 100, now the color of the face is almost never going to be green, because there's very little likelihood that they'll be green because of the balance. But it is still possible. So it's still possible that I could have like 0 red and 0 blue and like 50 green. Then it would be pretty green. So I can also change like the minimum value. So if I really wanted the red to always be greater than the green, I could set the minimum value for the red to be like 101. And so now there's always going to be at least as much red as green. And so I'm much more likely to have a red color, even though there's a little bit of green, there's a little bit of blue. It's random, so I can't totally control what it's going to be, but it's more likely that I'll have a lot of red and not as much green. So I'm still getting some random face colors, but notice that they're almost all either red or pink or blue or different variations of those colors, whereas my eyes are completely random. So let's say I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a most likely pink or blue face. And so for my eyes, if I want to have some nice contrast, I probably want something that's like a little yellow or a little orange. So in that case, I do want more green. So maybe I'll set the minimum green for my eyes to be like 200. Okay, so now I'm going to have these kind of green eyes. And now notice how much more contrast there is between the eyes and the face. Almost every time I run this, it's very easy to see where the eyes are. Versus before, sometimes the eyes completely disappear in the color. So this is kind of an interesting way to look at, color theory and color design, is how not only can I create random colors, but I can think about the mix of colors and how do I create contrasts and interesting, combinations of colors using these different values. Okay, so let's randomize a couple more things. I'm just gonna have a little bit of fun with the face, but then that's basically all there is to it. You can randomize pretty much any number, and so you can really play around with a lot of different variations. So I want to randomize one of my eyes, but not the other one, just to create a little bit of asymmetry. So I'm going to create a couple offsets. So for my right eye, I'm going to say RY, just a shorthand. This is not a very good variable name, but just to keep things short, I'm going to say random between negative 20 and 20. And I'm going to add that to my y value. So I'm going to say 200 plus RY. Okay, so that's maybe a little too much variation for the right eye. But so notice that now I get this asymmetry where one eye is not balanced with the other. I could also just add my 200 right here just to keep this a little bit simpler. Really, it's kind of up to your preference. So now I'm getting a little bit of variation and a little asymmetry. So I still have a pattern, but I have some kind of interesting variations happening in the pattern. Let's change the size too. So let's say variable S. I should really put I in front of these. So let's put I, or right eye, Y. For this one, I should just It's always good to name your variables because I'll come back to this later and I'll have no idea what I was doing. And then we'll do right I size. So for the size, let's do random between 20 and 50. This kind of exaggerate the size a little bit. So we have our right I size and we have our right I y. Okay, so now we have this weird, like, large I. 50 is probably a little too much. Maybe we'll say, let's say 30, 35. So now we have a pattern that has a little bit more character to it because we're doing some variations, but it's still recognizable as a pattern. So yeah, there's a lot of other things that you can randomize with this. Of course, you can randomize the overall size of each item. You could randomize the Y going across. Really anything that's a number, you can change with randomness. So I'll save this and I'll upload this example. You guys can use this as a template if you want to use this like basic breakdown with the N and the width. Of course, you can apply that to the Y and the height or the size, whatever you want to do. You could think about what would be kind of fun to make as a pattern and then adjust accordingly. But yeah, this is a basic idea. Any questions or anything you guys want to review? Okay.